Welcome to Trump Wire, your trusted source for breaking headlines, global insights, and sharp analysis from around the world. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. In late 2025, Venezuela stunned the world by launching a new oil trading hub, a move that would send ripples through the global energy markets and challenge the very foundations of international finance. But this hub wasn't in Caracas or anywhere on Venezuelan soil. It was established in Asian waters, strategically positioned to serve the booming economies of the East. The real shock came when Venezuela announced that every barrel of oil sold through this hub would be priced exclusively in Chinese Yuan, not in the traditional US dollars that had dominated oil trade for generations. This was more than just a business decision. It was a direct challenge to decades of American economic dominance, threatening the supremacy of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. News of the move sent shockwaves through Washington, infuriating President Trump and his administration, who saw it as a brazen act of defiance. To Trump, Venezuela's action was more than an economic maneuver. It was a calculated insult, orchestrated by China to undermine US power and influence on the world stage. The White House responded swiftly, issuing stern warnings and threats of severe consequences, determined to defend the dollar's dominance at any cost. Years of crippling US sanctions had already devastated Venezuela's economy, leaving the country isolated and desperate. With few options left, Venezuela turned to China, finding in Beijing both a powerful ally and a lifeline for its battered oil industry. The yuan-based oil hub was not just a survival tactic for Venezuela, it was a bold political statement, signaling a new era of economic alliances and defiance against Western pressure. As 2026 approached, the world braced for a major geopolitical showdown. The United States, determined to protect its currency's supremacy, faced off against a newly emboldened alliance between Venezuela and China. Tensions escalated rapidly, with global markets on edge and diplomats scrambling to prevent a wider conflict. Just days after the hub's launch, the crisis reached a boiling point. On January 3, 2026, US forces captured President Maduro in a dramatic operation that shocked the international community and raised fears of a broader confrontation. What began as a financial dispute over oil and currency had now become an international crisis, drawing in world leaders and institutions as they scrambled to respond. The world watched in suspense, uncertain how far the United States would go to protect the dollar and what the consequences would be for the global order. Venezuela's defiance had set off a chain reaction, toppling old certainties and forcing nations to reconsider their alliances. The stage was set for a new era, one that would reshape the balance of power across the globe. To truly grasp Venezuela's bold move, you first need to understand the powerful system that has shaped global oil markets for decades, the petrodollar system. This system is more than just a way to buy and sell oil, it's a cornerstone of international finance and American power. Since the 1970s, nearly all oil transactions worldwide have been conducted in US dollars. This was no accident. It was the result of a strategic agreement between the United States, Saudi Arabia, and the OPEC oil cartel. In exchange for military protection and economic cooperation, these oil-rich nations agreed to price their oil exclusively in dollars. The impact was enormous. Countries everywhere needed dollars to buy oil, so they stockpiled US currency, invested in American assets, and kept the dollar in constant demand. This relentless global appetite for dollars strengthened the US economy, allowed the government to borrow cheaply, and helped fund everything from infrastructure to military spending. But the petrodollar system did more than just boost the US economy. It gave America extraordinary geopolitical leverage. By controlling access to the dollar, Washington could impose sanctions, isolate adversaries, and influence global events with the stroke of a pen. Any attempt to undermine this system is seen in Washington as a direct threat to American interests and global standing. The stakes are incredibly high, so when Venezuela announced it would accept Chinese yuan instead of dollars for its oil, it wasn't just a financial decision, it was a direct challenge to the heart of US power. This move signaled a willingness to break free from the dollar's grip and align with new global partners. If other oil-producing nations followed Venezuela's lead, the demand for dollars could plummet. This would threaten the dollar's value, risk higher inflation, and make it more expensive for the US government to borrow money, potentially shaking the foundations of the American economy. That's why Venezuela's decision sent shockwaves through financial markets and political circles alike. It was more than just a headline. It was a signal that the world order could be shifting. This wasn't simply about oil. It was about the very foundation of American influence, the invisible threads that tie the global economy together, and the future of international power. Suddenly, the petrodollar's dominance was no longer guaranteed. The world was watching to see if this was the beginning of a new era. The global economic order was at a crossroads, and the choices made now could reshape the balance of power for generations to come. Venezuela holds the world's largest proven oil reserves, over 300 billion barrels, a staggering amount that surpasses even the reserves of Saudi Arabia. Beneath its soil lies a fortune that, for decades, has shaped the destiny of the nation and its people. Oil is everywhere in Venezuela's story, fueling dreams of prosperity, but also igniting struggles that would define generations. This immense resource should have made Venezuela one of the richest countries in the world. Instead, oil became both a blessing and a curse. While it brought periods of wealth and hope, it also sowed the seeds of deep inequality and dependence, leaving many Venezuelans in poverty even as oil money flowed. The economy grew dangerously dependent on oil, thriving when prices soared, but collapsing into crisis when they fell. Booms brought new highways, skyscrapers, and bustling cities, but busts left abandoned projects and shattered lives. The nation's fate became tied to the unpredictable swings of the global oil market. Years of government mismanagement, corruption, and mounting U.S. sanctions devastated Venezuela's oil industry. Once proud refineries fell into disrepair, and production plummeted. The country's main source of income was crippled, sending shockwaves through every part of society. Yet, even in the face of adversity, Venezuela's oil sector refused to collapse entirely. The country still managed to produce nearly 900,000 barrels a day, with most of it shipped to China, one of its last major buyers and a crucial economic partner. To bypass the stranglehold of sanctions, Venezuela turned to creative solutions, experimenting with alternative payments, cryptocurrencies, and digital currencies. These bold moves were risky, but they offered a lifeline, keeping oil exports alive when traditional banking channels were blocked. In late 2025, Venezuela amassed over 20 million barrels of oil on floating tankers in Asian waters, a strategic buffer for Chinese buyers. These tankers became floating vaults, holding the nation's most valuable asset just offshore, ready to move at a moment's notice. This move was more than just a business tactic. It was a symbol of Venezuela's determination to survive, adapt, and fight for its place in the world. Oil workers and officials alike rallied around the industry, determined to keep the country afloat. The opening of a new oil hub was a bold declaration. Venezuela would not be sidelined or silenced. It was a message to the world that the country was ready to chart its own course, forging new alliances and building new infrastructure. With its vast reserves, Venezuela now held powerful leverage in a new global game, one where energy, politics, and survival were all intertwined. Oil was no longer just a commodity, it was a tool of influence and negotiation. The world took notice. Venezuela was no longer just a victim of circumstance, it was rewriting the rules, determined to shape its own future, no matter the odds. U.S. sanctions made it nearly impossible for Venezuela to use dollars for oil sales. International banks refused to process payments, creating a financial blockade. Desperate, Venezuela turned to the Chinese Yuan and China's alternative payment system, CIPS. By trading in yuan, Venezuela bypassed the U.S. banking system entirely. China and Venezuela set up direct currency swaps and built the infrastructure for yuan-based oil sales. The new offshore hub was the final piece, signaling a real alternative to the petrodollar. The benefits were immediate. Venezuela could fund its government and imports again. Politically, it was a win for Maduro, proving he could resist U.S. pressure. Embracing the yuan was more than a currency shift. It was a new geopolitical alignment. Venezuela had chosen its future with China, not the U.S. China's support for Venezuela was strategic. not just generous. Beijing needed secure oil supplies, and Venezuela's reserves were the answer. As U.S. sanctions tightened, China deepened its partnership, helping Venezuela de-dollarize its trade. Chinese banks enabled yuan transactions, building a parallel financial system. Each barrel sold in yuan was a step toward challenging the dollar's dominance. China's confidence grew, seeing the U.S. as retreating from global leadership. Supporting Venezuela was a low-risk, high-reward move for Beijing. It gained energy, advanced the yuan, and established a foothold in Latin America. The yuan-based oil hub signaled China's intent to shape new global rules. Washington erupted in anger at Venezuela's yuan oil hub. President Trump saw it as a direct attack, a conspiracy with China. The administration vowed harsh consequences, determined to make an example of Venezuela. The real fear: if Venezuela succeeded, others, like Iran, or even Saudi Arabia, might follow. The U.S. escalated its rhetoric, framing Venezuela as a security threat. Days after the hub's launch, U.S. Special Forces captured Maduro. Officially, it was about narco-terrorism, but the timing told another story. The message was clear: the U.S. would defend the dollar at any cost. The U.S. response to Venezuela's currency shift echoed past interventions. Critics point to Iraq and Libya. Leaders who challenged the petrodollar often faced U.S. military action. Saddam Hussein tried to sell oil in euros. Gaddafi pushed for a gold-backed African currency. Both were swiftly removed, and oil sales returned to dollars. The capture of Maduro fit this pattern. Official reasons masked a defense of the dollar. For many, it was less about drugs, more about currency. The warning was unmistakable: challenge the petrodollar, face the consequences. Venezuela's move is part of a global trend: de-dollarization. Nations seek economic independence, wary of U.S. control over global finance. Even U.S. allies, like Saudi Arabia, have discussed selling oil to China in yuan. Russia and China are building alternative payment systems and reducing dollar reserves. The BRICS nations are exploring a new reserve currency. The world is shifting from a dollar-centric system to a multipolar one. Venezuela's yuan oil sales are a real-world example of this change. The alternatives to the dollar are no longer theoretical. Other nations may now follow Venezuela's lead. The petrodollar's reign is no longer unchallenged. The U.S.-Venezuela-China standoff has pushed the world to a turning point. Oil prices may spike and global markets face new uncertainty. China may double down, accelerating its push for a yuan-based trading bloc. The world could split into two spheres: oil traded in dollars versus yuan. Countries may be forced to choose sides, ending the era of a unified oil market. The U.S. use of force may backfire, fueling the de-dollarization movement. The Venezuelan crisis has exposed the dollar's vulnerabilities. A more multipolar, unpredictable world is now on the horizon.